when a 62-year-old man was publicly questioned for belonging in first class. He didn't yell or protest, but by the time the plane landed, his calm response had gone viral, and the airline was in full damage control. Raymond Jenkins didn't look like a man who needed to prove anything. 62 years old, broad-shouldered, silver streaks in his close-cut hair, and eyes that had seen more than they'd ever say. He walked through Gate C-12 at Phoenix Sky Harbor with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was and had nothing to explain to anyone. He wore a navy linen blazer, crisp khakis, and leather shoes polished just enough to suggest he still had standards, even in retirement. In his right hand, a worn, leather-bound book of Langston Hughes poetry. He carried it everywhere, said it reminded him who he was and where he came from. In his left, a boarding pass that read Seat 2, a first-class flight 349 to Seattle, was boarding right on schedule. Raymond was taking this trip for something simple: peace. After nearly 4 decades as a school principal in Decatur, Georgia, this trip was his small gift to himself. No family, no obligations, just the view from the window, a cold drink, and some poetry in the clouds. He greeted the flight attendant at the door with a soft, "How you doing?" and a warm smile that caught her off guard. She smiled back, scanned his ticket, and gestured him to the front row. As Raymond eased into his seat, the cushion felt just firm enough. He adjusted the overhead air nozzle, folded his jacket on his lap, and opened to a dog-eared page in his book. The cabin around him slowly filled. Quiet conversations, bags overhead, the kind of half-smiles strangers give each other when they know they'll be sharing airspace for the next few hours. And then came Captain Blake Renaud, tall, tan, and way too amused with himself. The kind of pilot who wore sunglasses indoors and called the cabin crew kids. He strutted through first class like he owned it, not just the plane, but the people. He gave nods to familiar faces, clapped a man on the shoulder, and chuckled at some inside joke with the flight engineer behind him. Then he stopped right at row 2, right in front of Raymond. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. "Sir," Renaud said, his voice loud and condescending, "are you sure you're in the right seat?" Raymond didn't even blink. He calmly closed his book, held up his boarding pass, and said, "That's what it says."
Rena looked at Raymond, then back at the seat. He forced a grin, but his eyes said something else. "Well, I suppose they're letting anyone up here now." It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough. And it wasn't the words, it was the tone. Like the idea of someone like Raymond in first class didn't sit right with him. There was a flicker of discomfort from the woman seated across the aisle. She didn't say anything, but she glanced at her husband, who had already started recording on his phone. Just instinct. Something about the pilot's tone felt wrong. Raymond didn't argue. He didn't flinch. He didn't get angry. He just leaned back in his seat and said, quietly, "I believe I've earned this seat, just like everyone else." Rena smirked, then under his breath, thinking no one would hear it. "Sure you did." He kept walking toward the cockpit. The man with the phone captured all of it, and that's where things changed. At first, no one said a word. The engine started humming, safety announcements began, but the energy in the cabin had shifted. You could feel it in the air, subtle, awkward, like something just crossed the line. Raymond went back to his book. The husband across the aisle whispered to his wife, "I got all of that, every second." She looked at him, unsure. "You think we should post it?" He nodded. "People need to see that. It's not right." The plane hadn't even left the gate yet, but what Blake didn't know was who Raymond actually was and how far this moment would reach. Raymond Jenkins did not need validation from anyone on that plane. He'd earned every mile that got him to seat 2A and 1,000 more. But to understand why he didn't rise to Rena's bait, why he didn't flinch or fold, You'd have to know where he came from and what he'd already survived. He grew up in Monroe, Louisiana, a small house on a quiet street with patchy grass and a front porch that dipped just a little on the left side. His father, Jerome Jenkins, was a janitor at the public high school and one of the smartest men Raymond ever knew. Never made it past the 8th grade but could fix anything, quote Baldwin by memory, and taught Raymond more about self-worth than any textbook ever could. Jerome used to say, "Don't ever let a man's assumption about you become your truth. Most people don't even know themselves, let alone you."
Raymond carried that line through every room he walked, into classrooms, staff meetings, superintendent reviews, PTA nights where some parents couldn't hide their surprise that he was the principal. Always polite, always sharp, always prepared. Not because he had anything to prove, but because he refused to give anyone the excuse to treat him like less. He started teaching English at 23 and became a principal by 35. During that time, he mentored kids who went on to become lawyers, chefs, electricians, and soldiers. Kids who came back to shake his hand with tears in their eyes. Not one of them ever forgot the way he made them feel seen. But for all the lives he touched, there were moments that stung. The store clerk who followed him through the aisles, pretending to reorganize shelves. The woman who clutched her purse a little tighter when he passed her at the bus stop. The car dealership employee who assumed he was lost when he walked into the showroom. He never shouted, never cussed. He just asked questions in that calm, even voice of his. "Did I give you a reason to think that would? Would you say that to someone else in my shoes? Or are you just uncomfortable with the fact that I don't match your picture?" He didn't need to raise his voice, he just raised the standard. So when Captain Blake Renard made that comment, it wasn't new. It was just another version of the same thing Raymond had faced his whole life. Dressed in a uniform, delivered with a smirk, but no different at its core. He had taught kids how to read between the lines, how words weren't always the message. Tone mattered, expression mattered. What wasn't said could be louder than what was. That moment in first class wasn't about a seat. It was about presence, permission, about who gets to exist in certain spaces without being questioned. Raymond understood that. He also knew the power of silence, letting that moment breathe, letting someone else feel the weight of their own ignorance. But what Captain Renard didn't know, and what no one else on that plane yet realized, was that Raymond had spent a lifetime turning moments like that into teachable lessons, not just for kids, but for anyone who crossed the line and didn't expect to be held accountable.
And Raymond wasn't alone on that flight across the aisle. The man who had filmed the exchange, his name was Brian Latimer, had already started uploading the clip before takeoff. No caption, just a quote. "Sure you did, Captain Flight 349. By the time the wheels lifted off the ground, the video was bouncing around Reddit and TikTok, thousands of views in minutes. The algorithm liked tension. It loved arrogance caught on tape. It fed on moments like this. Raymond sat, eyes on his book, unaware. He read the same stanza 3 times without realizing it. Something in his chest was stirring, but not anger, not shame, just a quiet knowing. This wasn't about him, not really, but this time someone else did it for him, and the world was watching. Flight 349 was halfway to Seattle when the ripple began. A 22-second video, grainy but clear, pinged its way across timelines. Brian Latimer hadn't planned to post it. He really hadn't, but something about the way the pilot spoke, like Raymond had wandered someplace he didn't belong, didn't sit right with him. And when he rewatched the clip, he heard it again. Those 6 words, muted but sharp. Well, I suppose they're letting anyone up here now. It wasn't just smug, it was loaded. It dripped with the kind of quiet disdain that folks like Raymond had spent their entire lives absorbing and navigating around. But this time the camera didn't blink. It caught the look, the smirk, the chuckle from the flight attendant who walked behind Raymond. As if on cue, by the time the flight attendants came around with drinks, the video had crossed 10,000 views. By the time the snack cart rolled down the aisle, it hit 100,000. Raymond still didn't know. He thanked the attendant with a small smile and took his ginger ale. Returning to the page, he finally managed to read without distraction. Outside the window, the sun dipped behind a layer of soft clouds.
Inside, a digital storm had already formed on the ground. Hashtag started at Flight 349, Raymond Jenkins. Someone had found his name through the passenger manifest, matched it to a retired principal mentioned in a local education article from 2 years earlier. A Facebook post with his photo, him in a cap and gown standing beside 3 graduating seniors, circulated on X with the caption, "This is the man that pilot tried to humiliate. He taught our kids. He deserves better." The replies came fast. Some were angry, some were ashamed. Some just shared it without a word.
By the time the plane hit cruising altitude, a petition had been launched to investigate the airline. And still, Raymond quietly flipped the pages of his poetry book, unaware of the noise building below. Blake, Rayna, up in the cockpit, was just as oblivious. He'd flown hundreds of routes, made thousands of decisions, and dodged more than one internal complaint over the years. He'd always landed on his feet. He knew how to cover his tracks. He knew how to talk his way out of anything. But this wasn't 1998. This wasn't behind a closed door or buried in a paper file. This was the internet, and the internet doesn't forget. Meanwhile, Brian turned to his wife and whispered, "It's blowing up." She leaned over and glanced at his phone. "Oh my God, do we tell him?" he asked. She looked over at Raymond, who was calmly sipping his drink and scribbling something in the margin of his book. "I don't think he even knows," she said. They waited. Maybe they didn't want to intrude. Maybe they were afraid it would ruin his peace. Or maybe they were just trying to figure out how you even tell someone their dignity is trending online. In seat 4C, a teenager with pink headphones tapped his mom's arm and showed her the clip. She gasped, looked up at the cockpit door, then down at the screen again. People began to shift in their seats. There were no confrontations, no shouting matches, just quiet stares, silent judgment, a new awareness of the man in seat 2A and the man behind the cockpit door. The flight attendants picked up on it too. One leaned in and whispered to another, "Did you see it?" She nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's bad." It wasn't long before a message was sent to headquarters, then another. The PR team at the airline got wind of it around 4:32 p.m. By 4:45, an internal meeting had already been scheduled. People were covering bases, pulling employee files, checking prior complaints. And Raymond? He just leaned back, eyes closed, remembering a poem he used to recite to his students. "I too sing America." He knew the irony. He knew the weight of it. He didn't need anyone's sympathy. He just wanted to land. But as he stepped off that plane, the ground beneath Blake's career was already crumbling. Flight 349 touched down at Seattle-Tacoma International just before 6 p.m. The plane coasted along the runway as passengers reached for phones, bags, jackets, going through the motions. But there was a strange stillness in the front rows, a collective awareness of something unspoken hanging in the air. Raymond Jenkins stood, stretched his legs and adjusted his blazer. As he reached for his carry-on, a soft voice stopped him. "Sir," Brian said from across the aisle, "before you go, there's something I think you should know." Raymond turned, slowly, calm as ever. Brian held out his phone. The screen showed Raymond's face, frozen mid-sentence, next to the words, "Letting anyone up here now." Raymond's brows drew in slightly. He didn't speak. "It's gone viral," Brian continued. "People are talking a lot." Raymond studied the screen. Then he looked at Brian. "You recorded it." "I did. I didn't plan to post it at first, but it felt wrong to let it slide." There was a pause, a long one. Then Raymond simply said, "Thank you." No anger, no tension, just a quiet acknowledgement. By the time Raymond stepped off the plane, his name was being mentioned on national radio. Within 30 minutes, a major cable news network ran a brief segment showing the clip. Analysts dissected the pilot's comment frame by frame. Legal experts chimed in. Microaggression, one said. Unprofessional and unacceptable, another. The airline's social media team scrambled to issue a bland, vague statement.
We are aware of a situation that occurred aboard Flight 3429 and are conducting an internal review. It didn't help. By 9 p.m., screenshots of old posts surfaced. An anonymous flight attendant had leaked an internal complaint filed against Captain Blake Reyna from 2 years prior. Different route, same behavior. The passenger had described feeling talked down to, dismissed, and subtly mocked. There were whispers among staff, too. Reyna has been like this for years, one employee posted anonymously. Arrogant, untouchable. We all knew it. It was all unraveling fast. The airline's PR team tried to issue a follow-up statement promising accountability, but it was too late. Comment sections exploded with personal stories from other passengers, stories of subtle digs, of being asked to show IDs in first class when others weren't, of being moved, questioned, watched. And then late that night, a second video surfaced. A former flight attendant, now retired, had saved a voicemail Reyna left her after a disagreement about crew assignments. His voice clear, mocking, unfiltered. "You can cry to HR all you want. They'll side with me. They always do." That sealed it. By morning, hashtags had become headlines. Veteran pilot under fire after viral video sparks backlash. Who is Raymond Jenkins, retired educator at the center of viral first-class incident?
And somewhere, in a modest hotel room just outside the airport, Raymond sat with a cup of black coffee and his phone ringing every 10 minutes. Calls from reporters, messages from former students, emails from strangers thanking him. He didn't answer most of them. He wasn't interested in becoming anyone's symbol. But what caught him off guard was the airline statement. At 10:43 a.m., Captain Renaud has been placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. It didn't feel like justice. Not yet. But it was something. A first crack in a wall that had stood too long. Raymond finally answered one call. It was from a young woman who said, "You don't know me, but you were my principal back in 2007. I just wanted to say thank you for staying calm, for not letting that moment turn you bitter. You taught us that, and now the whole world is seeing it." He smiled. Not a wide grin, just a quiet, knowing smile. "I'm just glad someone was paying attention," he said, "because that's what mattered. Not the punishment, not the headlines. The fact that someone noticed." But what no one expected was what Raymond said next, and how it shook the entire industry.